welcome to this episode of On the Road with Kelly and Bob, the USA 250 Tour. I'm Bob Phillips.
And I'm Kelly Phillips. Ever since President John F. Kennedy challenged the United States to, quote, put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, that decade, of course, being the 1960s, Americans have been very aware of our country's involvement in space exploration.
But truth is, long before NASA and our efforts to go to the moon, we were developing and testing rockets as part of our military programs. And that's when our destination city this week began to come into play.
We're headed to Rocket City, USA, otherwise known as Huntsville, Alabama.
I was born in Miami, Florida. Grew up there until I was about 8 or 9 years old. And then we moved up to North Alabama, community about an hour and a half or so from Huntsville. And as I grew up, my grandfather on my dad's side was a big Star Trek fan. I grew up watching reruns of Star Trek with him. And then Star Wars came out and I started watching Star Wars. So I've always been a science fiction person. I was always fascinated on the news, the stories about the shuttle launches. Of course, I was born before the shuttle program started at the end of the Skylab program. And so I recall just a little bit on the news about Skylab and everything. So I've always loved space science, whether it was the real space science or the science fiction kind.
Ed Stewart says it was reruns of the 1960s TV show Star Trek that first got him hooked on all things having to do with space science.
Then the Star Wars movies came along, and that pretty much sealed the deal. Ed would be going to space.
Been a part of my growing up and a part of my person since I was a little kid. I had a little bit of a hiccup as I was getting older. I learned that I had asthma, which qualified me out to fly any kind of aircraft for the military or to be a pilot for the space shuttle program. Was kind of bummed by that and kind of took a different direction because I did music and theater and stuff for a while as well. But then kind of eventually came back around when I got an opportunity to come to work at Space Camp one summer in 2001. I was going to be here for the summer and then move along, and I've been here ever since.
For every astronaut, there are thousands of people working behind the scenes to send rockets into space. So even though he knew he couldn't be the one to fly those space buggies, Ed Stewart was still excited to work on rockets.
And that's how he ended up here in Huntsville, Alabama, Rocket City, USA.
Huntsville, out of a whole random set of combinations of circumstances, ended up becoming the center for the Army's missile defense and research program. And so along with that came rockets, rocket engineers, paperclip scientists out of World War II. After spending some time in the U.S. Southwest in White's Hands and El Paso area, they ended up here. And out of that grew NASA's research and development program for propulsion and the rockets themselves. So capsules and satellites and stuff was typically other NASA centers. But once NASA became an official program in 1958, it sort of spun out of the Army's missile program and the Air Force's missile program, plus the aviation program that existed. All of that kind of ended up happening here. Construction started in 68, kind of wrapped up in 69, and in 1970 we opened our doors. That grew over time, and eventually in 1982 we opened up the Space Camp programs, which has helped us grow even more. And now we're a huge campus with multiple buildings and huge artifacts indoors and outdoors.
And of all the artifacts you'll see here at the Space Rocket Center, nothing comes close to the size of the giant Saturn V rocket.
It's the kind of thing you would expect to see in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in the nation's capital, but it's here in Huntsville.
So the Saturn V is a giant 3-stage rocket that launched Americans to the moon in the 1960s. And the early 1970s, it put our first space station into orbit around the Earth. And it was designed and developed here in Huntsville. We had a test firing of the large engines on the first stage that broke windows in downtown Huntsville from miles away. It set off, seismographs in Birmingham and in northern Florida. So the Saturn V, of course, this one was built here in Huntsville. Of transport parts of it got transported down to the Cape for facilities and checkout testing, and then it got brought back to Huntsville for further testing and development. So while the Air and Space Museum owns this Saturn V, it's actually never been to Washington, D.C.
It's never been in the Smithsonian.
It's never been in the Smithsonian. It's never left the ownership of NASA. There's a few different reasons why this would have never gone to D.C. and been part of like the Smithsonian's display collection. One, if you don't have room to put it, and they've got tight space out there in D.C., so it would have been a real challenge for them, not to mention the expense and the logistics of transporting and everything. But another reason why it hasn't gone anywhere is because it is a National Historic Landmark. It's also a National Engineering Landmark as well. So that sort of double status means it takes a literal act of Congress for this to move from our location here.
That thing ain't going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere anytime soon.
And you guys built this building for that.
Right. So for many years, the rocket was on display outside. So we literally started building the building and began the process of restoring the rocket kind of at the same time. And then we rolled the rocket into the building when the end was still open. And then we closed up the walls behind it. So there's literally not a door in this building that you can get this thing out of.
And there's a lot more than the Saturn V to see at Rocket Center.
Your favorite things that you gotta see.
No brainer, the Saturn V for sure. And then tucked away behind our Apollo 16 capsule is our Apollo 12 moon rock with a great inscription underneath it from
You have a moon rock.
We absolutely have a moon rock. Yep, yeah, it's a really nice size one too.
Are you authorized to have this?
We are absolutely authorized to have it. Yep. And believe me, it's a whole like take it in the aluminum briefcase cupped to your wrist if you have to move it kind of thing. So see the moon rock, our space shuttle out in Shuttle Park, Pathfinder, has the first external tank and a pair of unique solid rocket boosters. We have a lot of great treasure. It's hard to pick my favorite child. But definitely if you come in here, those I think are some of the marquee things you have to see.
What would you tell that little boy that you were once? Now that you're on the other side of that dream.
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I would tell him, don't worry, you're gonna find a way to make your connection with the space program. And when you do, it will be something you never imagined, but it will be phenomenal.
And now that you have made that connection and you're here and you're doing it, you're immersed in it.
Absolutely.
How does it make you feel?
I mean, I love coming to work every morning.
Kelly, we spent a lot of time talking about that big Saturn V rocket in that piece, and that's because it is so big and so imposing that it's kind of hard to take your eyes off of it.
Yeah, but like Ed Stewart said, they have so much more at the Space Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Let's get back to our conversation, starting with just what happened when they were first testing the engines on that big Saturn V rocket.
Huntsville is the rocket city and the home of the Saturn V and its testing and development. One of the things that we do a lot here in Huntsville, still to this very day, is test rocket engines. And when we were testing the first stage of the Saturn V, that has 5 F1 rocket engines that produce 1.5 million pounds of thrust apiece on there. So 7.5 million pounds for the group of 5. It was the most powerful rocket ever developed. But we needed to test those rocket engines. So we tested them individually. We had a test in, we just put one in and test fire it. Phenomenally loud experience. But then we said, all right, we've tested them now as onesies. We need to put them together and test them in the same configuration that they will be in during launch. So they put these 5 engines together and they did a bunch of testing. And when they did that, they were shaking things off shelves and breaking windows in the city, even though the test stand is like 3.5 to 5 miles away, just depending. And when that testing happened, it was being sensed by seismograph stations in Birmingham, Alabama, and in places in northern Florida. It had never been done before, and NASA had to pay for a few windows and some things here and there.
Was it worth it?
It was absolutely worth it. I mean, nobody here in Huntsville really complained, because when you hear a rocket engine, that is progress. That is part of the economic engine of Huntsville. And so we kind of have some pride when we hear that.
Talk about progress for a minute. I'm sure there are still some people out there who think, why am I spending my tax dollars on all of this? Why should we be doing?
When you invest in NASA's technological achievement and research and development, that comes back to us. The easiest analogy to make is back in the 60s, computers were the size of rooms. You did the punch cards into them to program them, and we needed that computing power for the space program, but we couldn't launch room-sized computers. So that pushed technology to start to minimize, and now you can wear these little tiny things on your wrist that can tell you your text messages and your emails. You can do the whole Dick Tracy thing and talk to them. That in and of itself has spun out technology that otherwise industry might have been a lot slower in development. And so there's a repayment that comes back to us in improvements in life that may not initially be obvious. New medical discoveries that have come out of the Skylab program and the Space Shuttle program and the International Space Station program. So just all sorts of things that come out of there that, it's a way to spend money and get a benefit back. And there's also, I think, a benefit of when we accomplish these amazing things, it's a way for us to feel proud of us as a nation, and a way to feel proud of what we can accomplish when all these amazing people work together to do these things.
Are we still the leaders of the space race that existed back in the 60s? I know it's an international thing now.
Absolutely. I would still say that we're still leaders in the arena of space exploration for sure. China has a space station. We cooperate with Russia on the International Space Station. Lots of countries now are sending probes to the moon and Mars. These are things that we have done and that we are continuing to do.
Let's talk about something that you guys started some time ago now.
Sure.
That really affects the future of all of this.
Sure.
Space Camp.
Space Camp came about as an idea from a conversation that was had between our first CEO, Ed Buckby, and Dr. Werner von Braun. So Braun, he kind of got the ball rolling for the Space and Rocket Center, and he kept having these conversations with Ed Buckby when he would come here on site and visit, and he would see the school groups that were coming and doing what they used to call the yellow bus tours, right? The kids get off the yellow school bus, they go walk around, they learn about the rockets and the astronauts and everything, and then they go back. And they were having a conversation about, well, how much do the kids learn when they're here for like 4 or 5 hours, maybe, depending on how far they had to drive and everything. And von Braun asked that question, and Ed said, I think they learn definitely more than they did before they got here, but there's definitely more for them to learn. There's more opportunities. And so that conversation evolved into a discussion about how there was baseball camps and sports camps and all of these different types of camps. How come somebody hadn't done a science camp yet? And so that little conversation eventually snowballed into the idea of having a space camp. And in 1982, a year after we launched the first space shuttle, Space Camp opened its doors for the first time for its first team of trainees. And we've been incredibly fortunate that some years ago we had our first astronaut with Dottie Metcalf-Lindenberger. And we've had more astronauts since then that have graduated from our programs. NASA center directors, countless engineers and scientists. Just recently, we had Christina Cook, who is a 5-time camp grad who went around the moon on Artemis II. And we now also have our first NASA administrator with Jared Isaacman, who came to one of our programs here in Huntsville as well.
You're training the future of the space program.
Absolutely. And Space Camp is a fun experience, but it is grounded in the reality of the space program. When we do our shuttle missions, they are based off of real shuttle flights. So you're learning a lot about the teamwork and communication on the mission control side. You're learning how to operate, a spacecraft on the shuttle pilot and commander side. You learn about doing spacewalks and science experiments with our ISS missions and our mission specialists and everything. Now that we've moved into Mars and lunar missions as well. We're taking kind of what we learned from the Apollo program and what NASA's talking about doing for the future with Mars and molding it around the same concept with future facing but still based in reality mission simulations. And so with that as sort of the base, while it's fun, we want it to be an opportunity for people that really are thinking about going into a space-related field to give them a real idea of what that may be like and be a springboard for them to learn more in high school and college and university and where they may intern and where they might have a career in the future.
What does it mean to you and to other folks who work here when you see those kids start out at space camp and they walk out and they've got that look in their eyes, kind of like you did when you figured out, because you've come full circle.
Right.
What does that mean to y'all?
Speaking as a person who used to work on the space camp side, you could always spot the kids that you knew were going to move on and do something in the field, because you would meet them and you would talk with them and you would teach them, and they're the ones that are asking those specific questions and they're wanting to dig deeper into this thing that everybody else is still fascinated by, but they're going, hey, wait a minute, and they want to learn more. And when you see that click in them, I don't know that there's a better feeling as a person who was their mentor for a week or their teacher for a week, or when they come in here to see the museum and they get their first real up close and personal experience with a real Saturn V or with a real lunar rover. When you see that light in their eyes kind of brighten up and they start asking questions and they start wanting to learn more and reading, you've nailed it when like the kid goes and they read every single sign on a display. That moment is just phenomenal. And as a person who now works in the museum part of it and who worked on camp, it just doesn't get any more rewarding than that.
Who are the people who end up working in this industry?
I think when you talk about the kinds of person, right, you're talking about people that are curious. I think you're talking about people that are driven. I think you're talking about people that are passionate about the thing that they do. Whether it's NASA has a group of artists and graphic designers that are passionate about what they do and how they represent NASA. So it could literally be just any field almost that you can imagine. But I think those qualities are what makes a person be successful at an institution like NASA.
So you don't have to be an astronaut per se to be an explorer and wonder what's over there, what's out there.
Absolutely. If you have that passion and that curiosity for what's over the horizon, that is the best possible thing you could have. If you have that, and then you pick your favorite way of getting there, right? Then you see in that journey of how your passion connects to that larger goal. Wernher von Braun, who was originally a German rocket scientist, became the director of Marshall Space Flight Center, and he really felt like it was important for the world to see what was happening here in Alabama. It was easy to know that the launches were happening at the Cape. On the television broadcasts, you heard a lot about Houston and what was happening at Johnson Space Center, but the R&D part, the nuts and bolts of the rocket engines and the rockets was happening here, and we didn't make the news as much. So he made a real conscious effort to do outreach about the space program, about what was happening in Huntsville. And eventually, Ed Buckby, who worked for Von Braun at Marshall Space Flight Center, was his media and PR guy, worked with Von Braun to develop the idea of the Alabama Space and Rocket Center, which is what we were called initially. And so we moved that forward. He lined up a bunch of rockets to come here and be on display while we still do work for NASA here in town on the Artemis program and SLS. We also have a lot of commercial space representation here in Huntsville as well, as we've got a huge Blue Origin installation. One of the test stands that tested the big F1 engines for the Saturn V is now a Blue Origin test stand where they test engines for the New Glenn launch vehicle and the ULA Vulcan launch vehicle as well. So we're still doing a lot in research and development for propulsion. We do nuclear propulsion, which ties us into the upcoming SR-1 Freedom project for NASA and everything. So we're still kind of working way behind the scenes, and us as the official visitor center, it's our job to showcase that to the rest of the world.
We were with a guy up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, who made the comment to us, almost everybody that has anything to do with rockets and the space program and all that that touches has spent a little bit of time at least
Absolutely.
in Huntsville, Alabama.
Absolutely.
That's a true statement.
Yes, absolutely. Astronauts, many of them are engineers and scientists in their own rights. They're not like they used to be in the 50s and 60s where they were all test pilots. There's still a healthy amount of those, right? But we have a lot more biologists and combustion physicists and all of these fantastic fields of science that work in the space program and become astronauts. They also usually work on engineers on other projects when they're not preparing for a mission. But they'll come through Huntsville because if they're going to be on a mission where they're going to be working with a science payload, for instance, the Space Station Science Payload Center is based out of here at Marshall Space Flight Center with the POIC. And so they'll come here and they'll train on their science payloads. Or maybe they'll come here to learn about how their engines are being developed and how they're being tested so that they have a better understanding of the systems of their vehicle. And it's the same thing. If you're going to launch a deep space probe, then you're probably going to come here and touch base with ULA because they're building a Centaur project that has something to do with the deep space launch. Or maybe they're doing some parts of the James Webb were tested here, parts of the Hubble Space Telescope were tested here. So we really do touch almost every part of the space program, and we get those people coming into town all the time.
Why is Huntsville called Rocket City?
Huntsville's called the Rocket City because we make rockets. We design them. To a certain extent, we test things. Maybe not so much as we did before, where we don't break windows anymore. Huntsville as the Rocket City came out of the fact that we still do missile defense here in town, and we still do civilian rocketry for satellite launching and human space exploration. So I don't think you get to be more Rocket City than where you design them and they then go out into the rest of the country. Rockets that are designed here in Huntsville and built actually at the ULA plant just outside of Huntsville, you know, they launch from California, they launch from Alaska, they launch from Virginia, they launch from Florida. So we have connections to launches that happen all over the country, and people probably don't realize that when they see a launch, and even with companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, their rocketry programs are still based off of the research and development that happened here in Huntsville in the 50s and the 60s, the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and through today. I think the development of the Saturn V and what it allowed us to accomplish with the lunar landings in the Apollo program kind of proved that with this technology that we had, we could do a lot with it. You know, it was a result of the space race, so we were kind of back and forthing with the Soviets on who could build the bigger missile, and this proved that this technology could accomplish things that were not necessarily part of the military and could have great scientific impact and great impact on what we as Americans saw was happening with our tax dollars. It was an inspirational moment. It was a moment of great scientific discovery and proving that when you get all of these amazing engineers and scientists together, that you can really accomplish amazing, phenomenal things. And I think that stuck with the American public for a long time. And I know for a fact that it stuck with the engineers of today's space program. They talk about watching the Apollo missions as little kids, and they talk about the impact that it had on them and how they wanted to be able to contribute to that as they grew up into adults and started working and going to school and everything, and whether they became machinists or whether they became engineers or, you know, HVAC technicians that work on these clean rooms and everything. Like, there's so many ways that you can contribute to that. And when you have an accomplishment like the Saturn V, the Apollo landings, and now the Artemis II flight, it just shows you that there's so much that you can do with whatever field that you're interested in love with. I think that it's that moment of inspiration that can change the course of lives.
What do you think our successes in the space program say about us as a country, about America?
I think from the very beginning, the space program has brought people from all walks of life, especially in the early days here in Huntsville. A bunch of the engineers grew up as farmers. You know, they grew up on local cotton farms or the watercress farms, or, you know, working on tractors with their dad and whatever the case might be. The space program in Huntsville really grew as an extension of its community. And from that, we began to attract people from all over. And we get from all over the country, all over the world. They come here to Huntsville because they know that if you are working in Huntsville with NASA on aerospace projects, there's no better place in the world to do it. And the ability of the space program to do that and to bring all of these disparate ideas and parts of the country together to accomplish these phenomenal things, I don't know that you can say anything better about a country or about a people than that.